Hello guys, welcome to the stream. Now I'm gonna just quickly do some housekeeping, just make sure everything is up and running. I'm gonna refresh the page. Sorry about this. I'm only on one screen today, so you're gonna have to share the experience with me. Don't know if it's actually running. I'll check my dashboard real quick. And looks like I'm up and running. I wanted to check the live chat on the on YouTube, so I'm gonna refresh my page one more time before we kick off with things. Okay, I think I'm live. I just got a notification. Can't really see it. I go to my home screen, and then we're gonna kick off this series. Here I am. Looks like I'm live. I'm gonna just pause this here so that I can at least have a look at the live chat if it's online. And we're gonna get started with this. It's gonna be a really interesting stream today. Let me just pause this video. Awesome. So guys, welcome to this particular video. My name is Will. This is a live workshop where I'm going to be going through the fundamentals of .NET C#. I really want to go from the ground up, from a practical level. I want to take you guys on a journey. From, you may not know much about C#.NET. You might be dabbling in the language, but in this series of streams, workshops, and videos, what I want to do is really deepen our understanding of how to practically utilize C#, one of the hottest and most lucrative programming languages on the market right now. There will be a coding bootcamp related to this topic, but more on that later. We're going to touch on that a little bit later, but for now, let's dive straight in. Have a little bit of an agenda here. Fundamental .NET C#, part 1. There's going to be various parts. We're going to start with part 1, section A. So what is C#? Now, to help me sort of define this, to answer this definition, we're going to go straight to the source. And I am quite partial to the MSDN documentation. I use it a lot for my own referencing. And I do encourage you guys to reference the MSDN documentation. It's now called learn.microsoft.com. I think the official name somewhat changed, but it's still the official Microsoft documentation for the entire realm of .NET, .NET applications, languages, platforms, all that good stuff. So we're going to kind of paraphrase these paragraphs. So C#, pronounced C#, is a modern object-oriented and type-safe programming language. C# enables developers to build many types of secure and robust applications that run in .NET. So as this paragraph sort of explains to us, C# is an object-oriented programming language. So what it allows us to do is to really utilize and to take advantage of this concept of grouping objects. You have concepts such as variables, you have concepts such as classes, and you are grouping all these conceptual pieces of data, objects, in order to form your application on a higher level. So what I'm going to do is tick this off our list, and we're going to soon dive straight into the code. I want this to be a very practical workshop. And I'm going to leave links in the description to this video in case you're interested in doing some further research. This is going to be very practical, but we're going to gloss over the theory right now, just so we have a little bit of a context as to what we're actually programming. So applications of C#.NET, C# front-end frameworks, and the utility of C#. So what I want to talk about here is where will you use C#? There's a lot of hot languages out there. You got Python, you got your Ruby, you got your web stack languages, you got like JavaScript, you got databases, which you can write via SQL. Now, where does C# lie in all this? What I found through my experience working in the industry as a software developer, as a freelancer also, and even in my own personal projects and learning, is that C# is utilized quite extensively in the job market, in the professional world of software development. A lot of systems that are utilized by companies, established companies especially so, they're mainly legacy. They've been built on Visual C# since maybe even the dawn of the language. Back in the days when the .NET platform, dawned on the industry, it was a really hot thing. It was a big thing, taking this concept of lower level software development and bringing it to a higher scope via you could even consider encapsulating the lower level so that you can utilize that on a higher front. So that is the advantage of C Sharp. You can go fairly low level with the language. However, it is not the, I would not consider it the most difficult language to learn when compared to others such as C++. The syntax is fairly straightforward, fairly human readable, and without much further ado, I'm going to also talk about some of the front end frameworks such as Universal Windows Platform, WinForms, and WPF. We're going to gloss over this in like the next 2 minutes, then we're going to hop straight into the code. So what I'm going to do is actually introduce you to the Universal Windows Platform, and I'm going to kind of explain why I want to use this as a reference. So the Universal Windows Platform, I think I also have a nice little article from MSDN about this. Let's see if we can find a good paragraph. So UWP, Universal Windows Platform, is one of many ways to create client applications for Windows. UWP apps use the WinRT APIs to provide powerful UI and advanced asynchronous features that are ideal for internet-connected devices. The whole concept of UWP is this. So Microsoft, understanding that they have a scope, a spectrum of services that span across their desktop services, their desktop applications, from their gaming platforms, mobile, internet, and cloud. The Universal Windows Platform looks to serve a unified base. It serves to provide the developer with one unified or universal platform for developing their core application, which can then be deployed across a scope of platforms. That is the magic of UWP. That is the essence of what UWP essentially is. That is its strength. And so as modern developers, I don't want us to, and especially in the context of this series and the bootcamp that's soon to be launching, I don't want us to be too caught up with the front end framework per se, but I think it's important to understand and distinguish between the front end framework and the programming language. We're going to be focusing on the C# syntax. We're going to be focusing a lot on the C# itself, but we're not going to ignore the utilization of a front-end framework. And I chose UWP because it's a little bit more modern than, say, the Windows Presentation Foundation, WPF. It's much more modern than the Windows Form Application platform. And it's useful. It's useful in today's day and age. If you have access to the Microsoft Store, hopefully you can see at the bottom of my screen there, I have the Microsoft Store app there. You can essentially deploy, you can build, debug, package and deploy Universal Windows Platform applications built using C# onto the Microsoft Store, as I've done in the past actually, and you can monetize them, as I did as well. I monetized my application. It was a Telegram bot automation tool, which when I was running my freelance small business, the company is now dissolved now at this current moment in time, but as it was operational, I was actually vendoring that software via the Microsoft Store. So I believe Universal Windows Platform is actually a very useful, a very relevant platform today. So we're going to tick that off. Already kind of answered this using UWP and other relevant project types somewhat. Let me just save that. So let's get straight into the nitty-gritty. So we're not going to go too in depth in this particular episode. This is going to be sort of like level 1. But at the same time, it will assume some prior knowledge, some understanding of C# concepts. Visual Studio, as you see, that's the ID of choice I have here, Visual Studio version 2022, which I do encourage you to obtain if you don't have already. And just this overall grasp of programming and programming language. If you're coming from absolute zero, don't worry, there is space for you. Still follow through with this tutorial, and I'm sure you'll be able to catch on in no time. So what are we going to look at here? The structure of a C# file. When we're working with C#, in particular in Visual Studio, and we've selected a project type such as the Universal Windows Platform, one of the first things we're going to be met with is this main page.xaml.cs. It also has a respective main page.xaml file, as you can see here. It's a little hard to see the design view, so I'm going to make the background black, like a dark theme, and I'm going to keep the actual viewport here as it is. So this view is essentially the front end. It is the XAML markup, and we're going to touch on this later in this tutorial. And just a heads up, guys, I did have a bit of technical issues during this week or so with my setup. So if the stream does cut out for any reason, I do apologize, and there will be an update on the situation. As with my last stream, and I have not forgotten, I still am going to continue with the puzzle game series. I actually recorded a section for that. Just a little bit of a tangent there. I know I'm a little bit late on that, but I assure you it is on its way. Now, back to this. We're going to come back to the XAML file, but I want to really draw your attention to the main page.xaml.cs, C#. And what do we have here? Let's start from the top. So we have a bunch of various lines of code here. And you can see a pattern. You can see using system.collections.generic, and so such and so forth. These are namespaces. Now, why are namespaces useful? The idea is this. There are developers that write functionality, and when that functionality is written, it is not 100% necessary. It's arguable that you need to rewrite the functionality for your own application. Therefore, by including namespaces in your project, you're essentially tapping in to pre-written functionalities plugged into your project such that you can use. So, for example, we might want to, and this is just a very quick example just to give you an idea. Let's go to the field level. I don't want to jump the gun, but I will give you a quick example. If I say something like, see if I got my namespaces right, system, hopefully I remember this one. We can just have a little browse here. I was going to look for the dispatcher timer, but diagnostics, I think it's under diagnostics, I'm not too sure. I could just write dispatcher timer, I can't find it. But anyway, as you can see, system, and you can see if I really do hope you can see the code. I will zoom in just a little bit because I know my screen is a little zoomed out. And the IntelliSense is picking up on the namespace system, as you can see, system, then system diagnostics. And if you look at this, it's really hard to see, so I do apologize, but there is a parenthesis. There's a couple icons here. If you're following through and you're looking at your IntelliSense, you see a bunch of classes, you see namespaces, maybe some interfaces and other things that we're not going to touch on too much on this particular episode. But with this bracketed icon, I can even filter it to show only namespaces. As you can see, we have some namespaces here, which are essentially folders that hold classes. That brings me quite nicely into what a class actually is. So if I filter this just to show classes, a class is basically a file. It's basically a file that you can write your C# functionality in, just as we see in this example here. We are on the main page.xaml.cs file. This is a class, and this allows us to script our C# logic within that particular file. We spoke about just now C# files. We're going to talk about fields. So when we're talking about fields, we're talking about you can consider it a space on the file where you find the name of all your variables. So one thing I want to draw your attention to is also the importance of documentation, self-documentation, and commenting code. Now, I'm not one to preach commenting or to preach self-documentation because I can improve on that front too. But when you're commenting along your code and everything is structured and organized, it will really help you as a developer, and it will help your team as a development team if your colleagues at work are taking over the scope of the project in some capacity and they can read what's going on. So why does that tie into the fields? Well, let's say, for example, we want to create an object. This is an object-oriented programming language. We want to create an object. We want to do something. One of the first go-tos is a simple hello world functionality, should I say, functionality program, however you want to consider it. Now, how are we going to do this? There's a multitude of ways we can approach this. We're going to start from square one. How do we build a hello world functionality in this program for C# with a UWP front? Here's one way. The way we're going to declare our variable is as such. I'm going to say private. Now, immediately you can see, I'm going to zoom in, this private is what's known as a keyword, and it is actually highlighted in blue. So that just kind of denotes that this is a keyword. It's called private. And and the keywords sort of describe logic, if that makes sense. So we're kind of describing the protection level of the variable we want to create, this object. So I'm going to say private. Now, if we want to display the text hello world, we're going to have to explore data types. And so what is a data type? Just as, I don't know, in the natural world, we have different types of objects. You have, for example, let's say this ceramic coffee mug, which has some lovely coffee inside, if I do say so myself. Nice. You have also other things like, let's say, this piece of plastic for this selfie stick. You could group these objects as types, such that this coffee mug is, say, a ceramic. This selfie stick is plastic. And such, we are grouping our objects as types of data. And this concept holds true. It is reflected, in programming. A lot of what we do in the man-made world, say, of programming and development, you can really tie that to natural concepts. So, for example, if I want to, say, display a text that is that says hello world, I probably want to deal with something known as a string. So I'm going to say string. And all a string is I'm basically describing my data type as a string, a piece of text, alphanumerical text. Now, let's give a name to this object. Just as we have a selfie stick, let's say this is a piece of text. So we're going to say private string text. Now, every time we finish a line of code, we want to make sure that we close that line. This basically tells the program this is the end of the line. Just as when you're reading a sentence and there's a full stop at the end, that tells us as the reader that this is the end of the sentence. The program has to know this as well. And how do we do that? Not with a full stop, but we use a semicolon as such. I'm gonna just make sure that the stream is okay. Looks like I'm still online. That's awesome. No technical issues per se as such. So anyway, what do we have here? We have a private, which basically says to the program, this object can only be visible within the scope of this class, of this file. The object in question is a string, and the name of the object is text. Now, of course, we want this text to have a value. And this value is, as I alluded to earlier, is hello world. How do we do that? There's many ways we can do that do these things in programming. There's always different ways to scale the mountain, as you could say. So I wouldn't even, say you can get caught up thinking, what is the best way? What is the best way? What is the way to do this? Because there are many ways in programming, but I'm going to give you just one of those ways. So this is what's known as a field, and I'm going to comment this code by basically how I just did what I did. I'm going to just do it again slowly. Just leave a little space. I have this, and I hope I got this right. I believe it's a forward slash. I always get them mixed up. It could be a backslash, but I believe it's a forward slash. The slash that is as such, as you see. On the field level here at the top, just under where you see public sealed partial class, main page colon page. We're not going to go too into depth into this, but this is basically our class, and everything within the semicolon is the implementation of our class. We're going to put 3 of these commenting code lines, these forward slashes, and we have this summary tag, as you can see, a summary tag open and close over here. And we're going to just describe our code. These comments don't have a particular functionality. They just denote what you want to write as the developer to help you reference your code, or anyone else who might be reading the code base. So let's write something simple here. This text, let's just say this is text. It's something so simple. This is text. Very self-explanatory. this string can be assigned a value. So this is a string. I think that's even better. A string is any, leave us, I'll press return there, alphanumeric character, and can be assigned a value. Okay, so that's text. Okay. Now, how do we give this object its value? Now, if you remember mathematics, we have different operations. We have plus, we have division, we have minus, we have equals. Now, we're going to use this equals symbol, but it's not quite the same as you might think. So here, the equal symbol actually denotes more of an assignment operation. We are assigning the value of our object to some value, as it were. And a neat place to do this would be the constructor. So we're still on this section. We've gone over the C# file, fields, constructor. What is a constructor? A constructor is this thing within our program, which when we boot the program, when we load it for the first time, the constructor is loaded. When you load a constructor, it is typically only loaded once. And as such, if you have a piece of logic, in this case the constructor, which loads once, you can essentially put initialization logic within that space of code. So let's say, for example, we want to assign a value to this text called hello world, and we want to do that just one time, because if we're always assigning values to our object, then we're wasting resources. So what we want to do is just do it once and let that value persist for the lifetime of the session. So this is the constructor, and as you can see, the way it is structured is you have to give it a protection level. So you can see this protection keyword again. We already dealt with private. Public is similar to private, just it's the opposite. So where private just tells the program, hey, this text object can only be seen within this class. Public says, hey, this class, this main page, this entirety of this class can be seen within the scope of the whole solution, within the scope of the whole project, should I say, rather. And so what I'm going to do, just as a neat little tangent, is draw your attention to the Solution Explorer. You can see a hierarchy of my folder structure of my project. I have the solution, coding example 1, coding ex1. I have the project, coding ex1, it's got the same name. And I have here my main page XAML file, which is the XAML design view you saw earlier. And I also have this main page.xaml.css, which is what we're editing right here. Okay, so if I were to make a new class, I'm not going to do that right now, but let's just say I did, hypothetically. By making this public, I'm just basically saying in that other class I may make, the new one, this main page is visible within the scope of the project. That's all it means. So you're basically making something visible, or you're making something private, as the name suggests. And there's not a, as you can see, there's no particular data type per se. It just has the name of the class, as you can see. And we have these brackets. And we have this body. So the implementation of our logic is usually denoted by curly braces. So these curly braces contain the implementation of this particular logic, which happens to be our constructor. And as you can see, as a default, it says this dot initialize component brackets colon. You want to leave that there. This does some important stuff in the back end, which just makes sure makes sure the program runs properly. So you want to leave that at the top. You actually want to leave that at the top of your constructor. You don't want to leave it underneath your initialization logic. You want to leave it there at the top. So we're going to leave some space underneath for our own logic, and we're going to write some logic here. So we're going to say text. Okay. Now remember, the equals is an assignment operation. So we're going to say text is assigned the value of. And now when I want to write an alphanumeric string, what I want to do is first have these double quotes, as you can see. So double quotes means that in the world of C#, here in this context, double quotes contain string value. So we can hard code our string value within these double quotes. I'm going to go ahead and say hello, comma, world. Let's put exclamation mark there. And I'm going to end the line to tell the program this is the line, the end of the line of this piece of code. This logic line 35. We are ending it with this semicolon. So what's going on here? Essentially, what I've done is I have written a variable in field level, which typically the fields are you may find them at the top. The constructor usually comes after the field, as you can see, and I have some initialization logic where I'm assigning the value of text to the string hello world. Now, what is a property? Now, properties are quite useful, and I'm not going to go too into depth on properties because I feel like it may warrant its own section in a slightly more later video, but I will highlight the fact that properties, they sort of function like, let me use a better term, they sort of function like methods, for lack of a better way of explaining things. Properties, they hold functionality almost like a method, which I'm going to introduce to you, so I don't want to jump the gun too much, but they can be treated as fields as well. So let's say for example, I want to write a property. Now I would say, as a good rule of thumb, it's good to have the field at the top, constructor afterwards, and your properties here underneath the constructor, that is. Now, why is it important to have properties? If we're dealing with fields, isn't it just the same thing? Well, yes and no. The fact is that with this field declaration, we're declaring that variable. There's no particular functionality assigned to this text. We had to initialize its logic here. Properties are a little bit different in that if we say, let's just say, I don't know, public string, and let's say we want a property which we typically want to make public, and I'll go into that in a hot minute why that is the case. And we're gonna make it with respect to this field. So we have a public property text, and what will be the core functionality of this property? It is to expose the value of a field. So we have a public property which exposes the private value of a field level variable. I really hope that makes sense. It's almost like having a window, right? You have, say, imagine a shed, a garden shed, and you can go through the front door, but it's private, so the door is locked, as you can see. Why not we have a public property, let's say a window, just like a glass window, which we can see through, which exposes the insides of the shed, the implementation of the shed. That's what we're essentially trying to do. So we're going to say public string, and before we can, let me just quickly write a comment here. So this is a public property which can be used to expose a private field. Keep things very simple for this episode. Text, I'm going to leave a space, and in this case I'm going to have a curly brace to denote an implementation. Now it's expecting is an error because it's expecting the property or indexer must have at least one accessor. What does this mean? So remember, we want to expose functionality. So we want to access the functionality of some variable. How do we do that? What we're going to do is use a keyword, and this keyword is going to be get. Okay. So what does get do? Get, as the name implies, it returns a value. So I'm going to say get, or it doesn't quite return a value, because to return a value we use another keyword, as you're about to see, and that is the return keyword. So get is getting the value, and how do we get that value in this implementation? As you can see, we are calling return, and we're going to say text. We're going to use a colon there. So anytime we reference text, we are getting the value of the field text. As you can see here, we're returning the field through this public property. So as a good rule of thumb, if we are protecting this in a private scope, we probably want to actually access the public accessor to the variable. So I'm going to change this, get rid of the field here, and I'm actually going to reference the property text equals hello world, as you can see here. Oh yeah, of course, but it is only a read-only value. Now, why are we getting this error? Why is it telling me that I can't assign the value of this property? Surely we were able to assign the value of the field. Well, there's a reason for that. Just as we have a get, we also want to perhaps modify our value. And how do we do that? We use the set keyword. Gonna put some curly brace for the implementation, and I'm going to say text. So that's the variable we want to modify, is assigned. We're going to use another keyword, value. Okay? And if you take this out, no pun intended, face value, all this is basically saying is that I want to be able to modify this field with some value. Okay? So that's that. Text is equal to or assigned to value, better said. So now the error has gone away because now the program acknowledges that, okay, there is a setter here. We can set the value of text and such, and as such, the error goes away, okay? So what have we covered here? We've covered fields, constructors, C# files, properties. Now we're going to go over functions in a hot minute. What I want to do is actually run the program. Now this is the cool thing. We have here the C# file we focused on. Now, I did mention, I spent a bit of time talking about the Universal Windows Platform front. How do we display this logic using this front-end framework? This is where the XAML sort of comes in. I'm going to go to my XAML page. Now, this is going to be, I'm going to really gloss over this because I do believe XAML does warrant its own video on its own. I even have a dedicated XAML video somewhere. Hopefully I can remember to put a link in the description somewhere on how to write a little example of how to write some useful XAML. But we're going to go over the basics. So XAML is a markup language, and we're basically just scripting the front end using this markup. So we have here a grid. I'm not going to go too deep into the controls and what they're about. That's going to be in its own section, its own video probably. But all we have to remember for now, to follow through this tutorial, it's really cool if you explore the toolbox. Hopefully it loads on time, because the toolbox has all the XAML controls you can place on your front end, from buttons to calendar view. You know, you have grid, hub, ink tool. There's a plethora of different controls you can use. There's a multitude here. We're not going to use the toolbox in this example. We're going to script it here. Why? Because it's a good rule of thumb. It helps you to remember the syntax and the layout, but I do encourage you to explore the toolbox so that you can know where everything is. I've actually deleted it, so to get it back, you can say view, and then you can click on toolbox and it comes back, as you can see there. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have in my grid, I like to use view boxes, and you might have to take my word for this because view boxes work pretty well with responsive design. I think I'm going to make a separate video on XAML, going a little bit more in depth. But if you want to follow through with this tutorial, make a view box for this Hello World program. Now we're going to put a text box in there. So what am I doing here? I'm rushing, aren't I? So to write your markup, as you can see, open pointed brackets, name of your control, and close it. And once you hit enter, it actually automatically has the closing tag as well, if I'm not mistaken. It just pops up, but that's the closing tag, that's the opening tag. And everything in between is your what you want to pertain within that control. A shorthand for this is to simply place a / at the end of the first tag. As you can see, the ending tag disappears because it's a shorthand. So you can place the properties of the text box here. So for example, I could say X, which just denotes a variable name, colon, name, and you can see the assignment is here with my double quotes, and I'm going to say, I don't know, hello, no space, hello world, text box, as such. So that's that. These borders are looking a little bit thick, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this property called border brush. I'm just going to make it invisible, so I'm going to say transparent, as such. You can see the border has disappeared, apparently. And just for good measure, I'm going to highlight the text box by clicking it on the XAML. As you can see here on the properties panel here, hello world text box. I'm going to scroll to the text tab. I'm going to expand it. I'm going to adjust the font size. I'm going to make it like 30. And I'm going to leave the font as is. I'm going to make it bold because I like bold. Did I make it bold? I think I did. Yeah. And that's all we're going to do for the XAML for now. Really want to focus on the C# stuff. This is not going to be a very long tutorial for this kind of introduction to the fundamentals. Probably going to be another 10 minutes or so. Now, how do we take this piece of logic? How do we take what we've done here, this hello world, this variable, and place it on the front end? How do we do this? Again, do you remember when I was speaking about the constructor? So when we boot the program, what we essentially are doing, the constructor is saying, hey, I am running for the initialization portion of this part of the boot up, then I'm done. So what we can do, we can take advantage of this. We can basically place this value, this hello world value, into this text box here, this text box property, which has a property called text. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reference hello world text box. I'm just going to copy it. That's the name. As you can see, hello world text box. I'm going to go back here, and it should be visible on the C# file. So I'm going to go ahead and say hello world text box. Now, how do we access members? Members are basically a general term for objects, and you essentially find members within members. So this is where the whole grouping thing comes. It's like having a bag. It's like having a box. Imagine a cardboard box which contains a bag, and that bag maybe contains fruit, from apples to oranges to bananas to pineapples. We're grouping things. So we have members. So what happens here when we use the dot operator, if I could say, just like a full stop dot, the IntelliSense gives us a range of different objects here. And we want the property, which is denoted by this spanner icon. And we want the text property. So I'm going to go ahead, find text is right here. And we're going to assign, remember we're going to use that equals symbol, which is essentially the assignment symbol. And I'm going to say text, the text is assigned a particular value. In this case, it's going to be the value of, you guessed it, the property text. I'm going to just quickly check my YouTube, just make sure, see if there's any comments, any questions, not too sure. I don't know. No, nothing there for now. Okay, sweet. So, let's go back to things. I'll just minimize that. So, hello world text. The text property, and all a property is, it's some member of, say, an object. And just as, say, as a human being, I have ears, I have eyes, I have hands. An object can have its own ears, eyes, and hands, if you get what I mean. Properties, they are essentially what define the object. So in this case, the text box can be, categorized as a control that holds text. So we access this with a dot operator. We say, okay, we want the text and we want to assign that value to the value of this property here, property text, which has the value of hello world. So in theory, if I were to run this program, we should see a text box, or, well, the text box is kind of like colored in white, which matches the shade of the background. But what we should see is this text hello world, if I've done everything correct. There are two options. We can either run with debugging here, as you can see, or run without debugging. I'm going to run without debugging for now because it's the quicker option. No, it's kind of outside the scope of this tutorial, but you have what's known as symbols and like debugging symbols, which are basically files used to help debug your program. We're not going to load those files because it makes the program load a little longer. We're going to go straight into this. Let's hope I did this correctly. If I didn't, it will be quite apparent and we can go through and rectify anything. So we went over fields, constructors, properties. Haven't yet talked about functions. So what I'll do is we'll wait to see what happens as I load this program. I'm actually on a low battery. I'm gonna just quickly double check. Should have really had the power bank, but it doesn't matter. We'll be wrapping this up shortly. So as soon as this loads, hopefully we'll see hello world, and then I'm going to talk about functions, and then we can cross this out. And as you can see, quite lovely there, hello world, as you can see. So if you've been following through this tutorial so far, congrats! And I mean that sincerely, because like, you know, you basically came from perhaps not knowing how this all works to writing your first C# functionality. And I think that's worth, you know, like a pat on the back, because when I first wrote my first hello world program, I may not have essentially said hello world. I was literally in a company as a novice. I knew nothing, but I learned everything on the go. And one of the first things I did was a hello world program. It was a piece of text assigned to a variable. I was thrilled when I did that. I was like, it makes sense. And I think it's worth acknowledging that. So there's the hello world. I really like the font. It looks really nice. And I'm going to cross that out. And then, so we've actually talked about XAML a little bit. I'm going to cross that one off. We talked about commenting. I'm going to cross that off. So the last part of this episode will be functions. What is a function? A function, all as a function essentially is, or a method. They're the same thing. You can consider a function and a method the same thing. It is a piece of functionality. You're telling the program, okay, act. You know, act on some code, on some logic that I'm going to write. So how do we denote a method or function? They're the same thing. Now, typically, I like to place them underneath the properties. So we have a nice, neat little structure. I'm going to zoom out. We have the field, we have the constructor, we have the properties, we have commenting code respective to them, and we also have the functions or methods themselves. So I'm going to make this one a private, because we're already within the scope of the class. So we're going to just stick with private. Void. What does this void mean? It's quite mysterious, isn't it? Void is it describes the return type. Every time we want to deal with a function, we have to consider what it's doing. And is it giving us information? You know, information in, information out. In what void does, it basically says there is no bespoke information. There's no particular information coming out. However, so as to not confuse things, I'm not going to utilize void for this actually. I'm going to utilize string. And you're going to see why. So I'm going to say I want to return from this functionality that we're about to write, I want to return a string. So I'm going to write string, and it has to come after the protection type, the protection level private, and we're going to have the name. So I'm going to say something like, let's say, change message. We're going to use a bracket, which is basically tells the constructor of this functionality, you know, I want to pass information into this. If you, and this is another thing for another video. Hopefully I use the right terminology. But when we're creating this function, if we want to pass other objects into the method, we pass them in here. Not going to confuse you guys with all this right now. That's for another video. But essentially, you want to write your protection level, data type to return, and the name of your method. Close it off with the brackets, you could say. And then have your implementation curly braces. And we have an error here. We're going to kind of rectify that. So what we're going to do is we want to say, okay, as a rule of thumb, is to actually have the naming conventions of your objects sort of reflect what you intend for the functionality to do. Why? Because this just means that as a developer, as a human being, I can just simply read your code, and the self-documentation basically tells me what's going on without me having to read a separate user manual. Do you know what I mean? So change message, fairly okay for now. We're gonna. I did the triple forward slashes. We're gonna fill out the comments. So I'm gonna say this method updates the let's say the text. Let's say the string text. And then under here, returns. What does this mean? This is just basically the commenting that is respective to the return type of the method. So I'm going to say returns. I'm going to say returns I'm going to say something like a hello evening I don't know if that even makes sense. Hello. And doesn't really make sense. Doesn't really matter too much. Hello and good evening. Message. Something like that. Not too important. So what we're going to do here, so we're going to now, we're going to use this return keyword once more. I'm going to say return. Now the program knows that this function is returning something, but remember, it's expecting a string. So we want to make sure we're passing a string here. So what do we want to do? Let's first modify the value of our text. I'm going to say text is assigned this new value, which is going to be hello and good evening. If that even makes sense. I'm going to close that off with a semicolon, and I'm going to return text. So essentially what I've done in this function, in this method, I've said, okay, text is now being assigned this text string value, and I'm returning the value of text. So every time we call change message, we're essentially returning the value of text. Now let's reference back to our XAML. I'm gonna go to the script. It's not gonna be the best layout, I will admit, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to have a canvas object, which you can use to basically put different, actually I'm going to change that, to put different controls in. I'm going to use a stack panel, I'm quite partial to them. Have a stack panel. And I'm going to place the text box in the stack panel, as you can see, like this. Now, because view boxes can only hold one control, I need to use a containing control that holds multiple controls if I want multiple objects in this. So I have a text box. I'm now going to introduce another control, a button. I'm going to use the shorthand. I'm going to give the button a name. As you can see now, on the designer view, the button has actually appeared automatically. I'm going to go ahead and give this button a name. I'm going to say X, as I did before, colon, name. I'm going to call it update text button. And this might be a good idea to kind of introduce you to the drag and drop, kind of the interactive features. I'm going to stretch out the button here. As you can see, make it a little bit more narrow. And let's give it some text. And how we do that is we use the content property. So content is not just string text you can place in a button. You can place images and other objects. That's why it's called content. But nonetheless, we're going to say update text. As you can see, hopefully, even I can't see it. It's actually really hard to see that. I'm not too sure why. So what I'm going to do in that case, gonna just make the text a little bit bigger, 30. I'm going to change the foreground property to black so we can hopefully see what's going on. And I still can't see the text itself, which is something I'm not too sure. I'm not sure why that's happening, but hopefully at runtime we should see it. Very strange behavior there, but nonetheless, we have our button. Now we're gonna go back to this property panel. There's like a lightning bolt option. We're gonna click that, and there's a bunch of things here. You know, we have all these verbs. We have got focus, holding, key up, key down. Like what does this mean? What does this all mean? These are called events. Now this is slightly touches on the more advanced topic, so for the sake of argument, we're gonna just gloss over this. What an event does, it's a piece of functionality. And the functionality we are concerned with is click. So we're basically saying every time the button is clicked, we want some functionality to take place. So I'm going to double click this little space here next to click. And what you should see is that there's some code automatically generated. It's our update text button underscore click. I already forgot the name of the button, so I'm going to go back to the XAML. Going to get the name of the button. So every time we click the button, this functionality fires. And what do we want to do? We want to call change message. So we don't even need the name of the button, and it was here anyway. So I'm going to call change message. How do we call a functionality? you know, the constructor automatically ran our logic, but with a function we have to discretely call that logic. And how do we do that? We need to call the function. We need to tell the program this logic, a piece of logic has to execute at a certain time. So what we're going to do, we have to get the name of the function, change message. We're going to use the brackets to close it off, and we're going to use a semicolon to close the line. It's as simple as that. Do excuse me. I'm going to leave a comment that says this method calls the change message function. And we also have param name, and we have sender. So all the sender is actually the the initial object pertaining to the event. So you could say something like the button control, something like that. And E is basically an overload which pertains to this class, the rooted event args. And this just gives us access to certain members and functionality. And so we could just say, to describe E, we can just say the rooted event args, or arguments, I think that stands for the rooted event args for the button. Something like that. So when I run this program, hopefully what we should see is when I click the button, the hello world should change to hello and good evening. I don't know why I couldn't see the text earlier. I do hope that everything is okay with the XAML side of things. So we're going to just test it out now. Very strange. Maybe it was out of the screen or something. I think it was off scope. I have zero idea. I'm not going to lie. So just going to run the program. Going to check if there's any questions. There might not be. Nice. Hello there. Oh, well. Hello there. I'll just say it out loud from my mouth. Hello, Nine Gaming. Good to see you on the stream. Let's see now. Where am I? So I think my project just loaded. Now, of course, we have some formatting issues. This all pertains to the structure of the XAML. I'm going to very likely make a dedicated video about this, about how to make sound the XAML. But hopefully, just hopefully, if I click this button, we should have had an update of text. Nothing happened, and we're going to figure out why that is. That brings us quite nicely to back to this. Now, already I know where I jumped the gun. Of course, we updated the text value, but how do we know that that text is displayed on the button? How do we know that? This brings me very nicely to this idea that the code is like, writing code is like driving a car. When you're a passenger in the car, you know, when I was growing up and I was always a passenger in a car, I always assumed the car knew what it was doing. The first day I ever drove a manual car, I realized that I have to do everything, and I mean absolutely everything pertaining to the car. The car will not drive itself. So in this case, I made the assumption that the button will say, the text rather, will say hello and good morning after the update. But what I need to actually do here is not only update the text, but I need to update the visual. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, so it was something text box. I can't really remember what the name was. Hello world text box dot text is assigned to the value of text, which has been updated. As you can see, while we're here, let's quickly jump to the XAML. Let's see if I can quickly fix the layout. If not, it's fine. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. If it does, I'm going to skip it. It's always good to save often. I'm always there saving often. And it's taking a little minute, so I'm going to go back to my CSharp file. And I'm going to run without debugging. Do excuse me. And I can see something in the background. Now, let's see what happens when I click this. Nothing. So let's just go back out. Cross that out. I'll wait for this to load. Not too sure why I don't have access to the build. I think that was the older version. That was very strange what just happened. So let's let this load again. Hello world. And as you can see, I just clicked the button and the updated text hello and good evening appeared. Okay, let's maybe run that one more time. That was a little bit interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and run without debugging. have our UWP project loading up. Hello world. The button is here at the bottom. Not very nicely laid, but nonetheless, it's here. Gonna click it. Hello and good evening. There should be an exclamation mark, but it seems to have been cropped out. I think. Is it an exclamation mark? No, there wasn't. Sorry about that. My apologies. I was incorrect there. So yeah, hello and good evening. So we went over the file structure of a C# file, fields, constructors, properties, and functions, and their respective utilities. So I'm going to leave an X there. We went over documentation and XAML. So guys, and yes, we went over hello world. I forgot section D was in this part of the video. We wrote a simple hello world functionality, variables, yeah, definitions, yes, and instantiations. Now, instantiations is a fun one. Now, this is going to kind of bring us nicely to the next video. And I'm going to use just a general example for this. If we have a class, let's say we have a random class. In fact, I said the word random. So let's say random, which is actually a class in .NET. I'm going to call it RNG. That's the declaration. Now, what do we want to do when we want to invoke an instance of this class? When we want to say we have a particular random functionality, an entity which is known as random, we need to instantiate that class. We need to make that class its own. Kind of like you have a group. You can have a group of 100 people in a room. They're all people, you know, with certain properties and similarities, perhaps. But take that concept into the coding world. We want to make a random, or we want to make one random, an individual random. What we want to do is instantiate. So we're going to say RNG. We're going to use that assignment, and we're going to say new. We're going to use a new keyword, no pun intended. This new keyword is new. And we're going to say random. And we're going to place the constructor, denote the constructor with this brackets here. And we're going to close it off. So now the program knows every time we are referencing this RNG, it has its own space in memory, I could even say. So that's RNG, that's the random. This is a different class. It doesn't pertain to the functionality of this particular video, but it's just there to just demonstrate instantiations. So I'm going to take that off. With that, guys and girls, we have actually made it to the end of the video. I don't think that will interfere with the functionality of the program. I'm going to run it one more time. Hopefully we have no technical issues. My battery is quite low on my camera. I'm at 8%, so I'm going to wrap this up very, very swiftly. Just going to wait for this build to deploy. And then while we're here, let's do things all at once. So as I did allude to, there will be a coding bootcamp that will be launching soon. Do keep up to date on the channel and any of my other relevant handles, as I will be posting updates on the matter. As you can see here, hello world, click the button, hello, good evening. So it's going to be a great way for you guys to really get into the nitty gritty. I'm considering making it a collection of live workshops, resources, and recorded videos to really take you from perhaps, let's say, coding C# 0 to hero, to mastering the fundamentals. You will be able to write in C# at a very sound level. And there should be some updates also on my website, which I don't know if I have the link here. Is it this? For now, the C# Fundamentals Online Coding Bootcamp, you can come here and register your interest if you wish. Name and email, and visualstudios@gmail.com if you have any inquiries or questions about the matter. Guys and girls, thank you for tuning into this live stream. I hope you gained some knowledge, whether it's entertainment, education. I hope I did my service justice today. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next video. And this is a little bit of a note. Yes, the arithmetic number tutorial is still coming. I did record a section. I'm really sorry for being slow on that part. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Let's just go here. I'm going to end the stream. Which one is it? See you guys. Bye-bye.